It's about that time.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of City Views. Thank you for joining us today. And as always, we want to thank the sponsor of City Views, Toth Insurance Agency, located at 1151 East Main Street. For all your insurance needs, make sure that you check it out. Talk to my main man, Mr. Steve Toth, and I'm sure you will understand why he is the man, because he's got the plan. All right? All right. In the meantime, we have today here with us Harwinton Selectman, Mr. Mike Criss. And it's such a nice situation to have Mike here with us today because Mike is a friend of mine, and we've jabbed at each other in the past on many different occasions about many different issues. But the one thing that we do have in common, it's our love for the community. So, Mike, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today.
Anytime, Jacque. It's always a great pleasure to hang out with you for a little while and do an interview. And I always enjoy the banter that we have. And you're very, very right in the fact that we both care very much about our community and about the people within our community and just making it a better place. So thank you.
Absolutely. How's the family, by the way?
The boys are getting big. I don't know if you can tell all the white hair as the boys get bigger. So at some point, we'll just have to shave completely, I think, because it's going too white. But they're great. They're growing and they're getting big, and they're involved in so many different things. And it's a great experience being a father. It really is.
And also, your brother and I have something in common as being the original members of the Torrington Arts and Culture Commission, which we proudly boast about. But knowing you and knowing your brother, I can definitely understand the synergy that you two have, especially after meeting your mother.
God bless my mother. That's all I gotta say. God bless my mother.
Somebody had to hold it down.
Very true. That's true. Very true.
So, Mike, there's obviously a lot going on, and I know how busy you are under normal circumstances. How have you been able to kind of manage things with the COVID? With the I still can't pronounce the name of the storm.
Say it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an extraordinary time that we're going through right now.
It is, Jacque, and I'll tell you, being the legislative liaison for the Northwest Hills COG and being first selectman for the town of Harwinton, and then having all these events and being a dad and everything and having all these events come up, I'm just thankful that I was born and raised as a multitasker, because I don't think I could be able to do it if I wasn't a multitasker, because there's so many moving parts right now. And on top of it, you've got, legislation starting up in September and a lot of proposals coming out. So, not only are you doing your regular job, which are a lot of the state requirements that are due this time of year, but you're also dealing with a lot of the legislative proposals that are coming out. You're dealing with the storm Isaias that came out. Then you're dealing with COVID-19 and having to find a new way to work and engage the public and still provide services. So it has been, and I joke because I always say that a lot of selectmen, they get elected and they only have to deal with one storm. And I've had the pleasure of dealing with not only the winter ice storm, but Storm Sandy, where I slept at the town hall for a week on a cot while we monitored the storm. And then we deal with Storm Isaias. We're dealing with the pandemic. And it's a lot of moving parts. And I create a lot of these little books. I don't know if you can see it there, but I create a lot of these little books. I'm a binder guy. So I have binders on all this stuff and protocols and stuff that we adopt so that we can continue to function and operate and provide the best service we can to the community. But we're getting through. We're getting through for sure.
Well, Mike, I want you to talk a little bit about the COG in terms of, because even though you have to stay focused on the current situation, um, you still have to keep an eye on what's next.
Correct.
Where do our cities, where does our region look to maximize its resources and to keep a vibrant economy in the northwest corner? Talk a little bit about your thoughts on how the COG can play a role in that development.
Well, I think quite honestly, I mean, if you remember right, the council of governments were broken up into all little groups at one point in time. And then a few years back, they consolidated the councils of governments because there were too many little groups. And really, we had a lot of the same interests. So they created a new group called the Northwest Hills COG, which encompasses 21 towns in the Northwest corner, all great leaders, no political affiliations when we sit around that table. We all have the same goals and ideals in mind, but the Northwest Hills COG plays a critical role in the development of the Northwest corner, from transportation to economic development to social responsibilities and future planning of the Northwest COG and utilizing the services to the best of our abilities. A lot of small towns, many people don't know this, but a lot of small towns don't qualify for state or federal funding. So when you have something called the Northwest Hills COG, or whether it be the Central Valley COG or anything like that, these COGs, because there's so many towns associated with them, it allows us to participate in funding that can be released to the COGs, and then the COGs administer it to the towns. But it also gives us added services where you have administrative staff that can help you identify funding resources for your communities. Maybe you want to do something like a cityscapes program or playgrounds or ADA compatibility. They can identify a lot of those grant programs, and because we're a COG and we represent 21 communities, the COG can apply for a lot of that funding on your behalf and then administer it to the 4 or 5 or 6 towns that maybe were interested in getting that funding. So I would say the Northwest Hills COG, quite honestly, has played a critical role in re-engaging the Northwest corner in legislative parameters, funding opportunities, and really the development and the improvement of the Northwest corner in its plan.
So in that plan, it's a comprehensive plan, as I understand it, with 5 major components to it.
Yeah, there are 5 major components to it, and a lot of it, a lot of our focus really over the last few years has been, really trying to promote more arts and culture in the Northwest corner, because as you know, and working with my brother and stuff, arts and culture is kind of almost the main bloodline that runs through the Northwest corner. And then there's opportunities for one of the key things that's come up over the years that we've been focusing on is trying to improve transportation for young executives that are looking to live in these outskirt towns, these rural communities, but also to transport into Hartford or say down into New York City to do work and still have that high-paying job or some sort of career and be able to still be home with your family and enjoying the rural character of Connecticut,
Yes, I think that's the forward-leaning perspective that an organization like this has to have in order to continue to promote the assets from the area as a whole. And with all that being said, do you see a possible tie-in in terms of some of the issues now that you're facing with deployment of issues of resources during the COVID, in terms of, especially in terms of nutrition and meal delivery? I know that's one of the components that the COG is really interested in terms of making sure that it's deploying those resources efficiently.
Yeah, I think that because we are small communities, a lot of people think that we don't have the same blights as big cities, and we do. We have a Harwinton food pantry currently feeding more than 30 families, and when we never had a food pantry before. And a lot of that guidance comes from that. But you have the food hub through the Northwest Hills COG, and you have that outlet where they can provide services such as shared highway equipment, such as catch basin cleaners and paving machines and sweepers and stuff. Big equipment that small towns, especially like Harwinton of 5,600 people, don't want to see a huge tax bump for equipment that we're going to use once or twice a year. This gives us the opportunity to not only house the equipment in different areas of the Northwest corner, but also share that equipment with other communities to provide a good quality of life and a good quality service. So, a lot of the focus goes to the food hub and a lot of the social service aspect of saying, how do we provide? And as you know, Torrington and Winsted being the largest two members of the Northwest Hills COG, many of our rural communities, Harwinton, Canaan, Barcampston, New Hartford, all of us depend on Torrington and their ability to provide those services. And they would not be able to provide the services, I think, as efficiently if the Northwest Hills COG was not in effect, going after funding and trying to work with these organizations to make the delivery of services to these outreach communities much more efficient and much easier for people to identify and take advantage of.
Another great point that you just made, Mike, and I think it's a credit to the vision that's being presented by the COG. Now, one thing that, as far as the tie-ins between the current situation and going forward, is the significant loss of business that COVID has cost us.
Yeah.
However, that is another component of those measures from the COG. Going forward, especially now that the House is getting ready to come back into session, what are those important factors that you think need to be focused on, not only to prevent any further small businesses from being lost, but to enhance the stabilization of small business and encouraging more entrepreneurs in the future?
To be honest with you, Jacque, I think and it really does start with the state. And I'm the first person to say, and you know this as well, I'm not a big advocate for big government or any type of state help. I'm always the first person to say, if the state's going to help you, run the other direction, because they typically don't. But the reality is that as small communities, not only do we have to bond together with our local business owners and find out and identify, and that's really what a lot of us local leaders are doing right now during COVID-19 is sitting down with these local leaders and holding a lot of these virtual type meetings, these local businesses, and finding out, what are the obstacles that you're having and how can we help to overcome those obstacles. We bring those back to the Northwest Hills COG and we look at those and we analyze them. And it gives us a platform to go then to the state level. And as you know, I'm not very quiet about the state, and I typically go down there quite often and voice my opinion. And in fact, I'm considered one of the biggest mouths from the small community, and everyone knows me down there, so that's a good thing. But the reality is it gives us a platform to identify the needs within the communities of these local businesses, so that we can have some sort of stabilization, because in these small communities, we don't have a very large tax base outside of homeowners. And if these businesses close up, it just extends the burden onto these homeowners. So our goal right now is to try to work with the state to come up with tax incentive programs and tax break programs for these businesses that had to suffer through COVID-19 that remained open. But not only that, but the ones that are on the verge of closing, what do we do to save their business? As far as being able to operate a business in the state of Connecticut is extremely an uphill battle. And you're either small or you're big or you don't exist. There is no medium businesses anymore that used to employ a great number of the blue collar workers, such as myself. What we have to do is we have to somehow work with the state and create a platform that directly targets and makes the ease of entry back into business and makes the businesses that are still open operate at a much easier incentive. whether it be tax breaks, workers' compensation, some sort of labor regulation redrafts. In the trades, we look at relicensing redrafts for apprenticeships. Let's get more of these kids that are coming out of the trade schools into jobs, into actual, being plumbers, being electricians, being auto mechanics, instead of serving these extenuous and tedious apprenticeship programs. And then looking at it from a standpoint to say, okay, if you're going to maintain the workmanship, what is the business's plan to expand if we were able to give you these breaks? What would these breaks look like to you? So a lot of the local business owners that I talk to, a lot of them have always said it's really the tax burden. You've got these pass-through taxes, which, mean absolutely nothing. It's just revenue to the state. So say you're an LLC in the state of Connecticut and your LLC is just basically rental properties, for instance. You have to cut a check to the state quarterly, and they call it a pass-through tax. And this is something they established, and I fought against over 2 years ago. And same thing with the entity tax. You have to pay a tax to exist. That doesn't make sense. You're a business. You've already paid your dues to get in and establish yourself as a business. You have your regular ongoing fees, whether it be ongoing training, whether it be ongoing operational costs, your regular quarterly taxes, your workman's compensation, your insurance and liability. All these costs are really bearing down when you start to see these new tax programs for businesses, which are just, they're just the most insane things you've ever seen. So I think if we can work on a platform that would make it easier for businesses to open or to stay open, and to make it, we have to understand as a state and as a town that these businesses are not operating like they used to be prior to COVID-19. And this may be the new way of life going forward for quite some time. And if we don't do something now, we're going to see a lot of these small businesses closing up because they just can't perform the service that they could perform. They're not getting the traffic that they used to get. You see places like, which I was very sad about, was seeing Sliders close in Torrington because I happen to love their wings. Not that I need any more wings, but I love their wings. Okay, and you see businesses like that close when there should have been some major step to say, how do we save it? Because they were growing at the time prior to COVID-19, and you want to continue to promote that, but you can't promote it until you start to look at really how and when a business functions and operates in the state of Connecticut, and all the parameters that a small business is held to, similar to a large business, that make it next to impossible to grow your business any further than what you can, which keeps your revenues down. And rents, let's face it, rents go up almost every year. So these places are paying rent in most of the buildings, and there's no incentive there's no real incentive put forward by the legislators to keep these businesses open. And I think they really have to evaluate this session and spend a lot of time on how do we save the economy. And the only way to save the economy is if you have jobs and you got businesses. You have no businesses, you're not going to have jobs, and this economy is going to get worse and worse. And the state of Connecticut could be, in really bad shape going forward.
Well, that's why I think that it's important right now to have the COG, because we need to come up with a way to do tax reform that is going to be backloaded, actually, because in other words, there's no bumper right now. There's no buffer right now. And I'm glad that you're aware of that very, very, very thin line right now that's separating us from an economic demise. And that's something I don't think people really consider and think about. You have this kind of slow erosion.
Yeah.
And then the floodgates, they just open. It's not, you can't prepare for a tsunami unless you're prepared for a tsunami.
That's right. That's right. And one of the things that's concerning, Jacque, is that the state, I still don't think, realizes that their main source of revenue, and the main source of revenues for small communities, is property tax. And our taxpayers as a whole, let's face it, across the state, are at their max.
Right.
And until we until we come to that realization as legislators, our legislative body out there comes to the realization that, hey, our taxpayers can't take any more. They're at their breaking point, and we need to shift our focus to saving businesses, because that is going to be that's your foundation of this house to rebuild this state and take the burden off the homeowners, so then they can spend money within the communities in the Northwest corner and throughout the state. I mean, people can't travel, they can't take vacations, they can't do anything because they're maxed out. And let's face it, years ago when you and I were kids and stuff, we probably had one parent that either stayed home and one parent that went to work, and you could survive. You weren't living on the hog, but you could survive. Now you've got two parents going to work, working sometimes 2 jobs, 3 jobs, just to keep a roof over their head. And now you add homeschooling to that. Talk about putting pressure on our families, and you really have to shift that focus to reestablish what the state of Connecticut was known for, which was its industry and its businesses, and most importantly, its small businesses. A lot of these small businesses get overlooked, but they're really the crux of what keeps the economy going. And if you start wiping these small businesses out, you're going to see the Connecticut economy not only stay where it's at, but even get worse as we go forward.
I think that's going to could be, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but that could be a nationwide phenomenon as well.
Absolutely.
And I think, however, and this is what I hold out hope for, Mike, because I think that in the Northwest corner, regardless of sometimes the pushback that you hear from various sectors about the way things are being handled, we have a pretty nice delegation here in the Northwest corner. We have access to our state legislators. We have a voice. The governor has made himself available to us in this area on a few different occasions. And I think that there's that understanding that within, I think the general consensus is that we have to amp down the political polarization of issues so that we can, what you just suggested earlier, it's very imperative right now that when you go to talk to the representation in Hartford, that first and foremost among anything else, they need to understand and be aware of the severity of the situation.
That's right.
You gotta go into this with soberly and realistic.
Right. There's no space anymore, Jacque, and I'll tell you, that's the one thing that saddens me, not only about our state but about our country right now, is that there's 2 sides, and it shouldn't be that way. The way I look at it here in Harwinton as a local leader, I'm a registered Republican. I'm a Republican, but I always tell people, if you were looking for someone to run the Republican flag down the field, that's not me. My feeling is, in Harwinton, my thought, we're family here, and most community leaders feel that way, that our communities, we're family. It doesn't matter. You always got the troubled children, and it doesn't matter if they have a D, an R, and an I after their name. At the end of the day, we all have to put that nonsense aside and get out of our own way. We are our own worst enemies when it comes to politics in this nation and in this state. And we need to put that garbage aside. My feeling is, get rid of both parties, create everyone as an independent, and let's just get the job done. Because this nonsense, and I see it a lot at the Capitol, this nonsense of, party lines and jamming things down each other's throat. Doesn't matter who's in power. It's disgusting, And when you're sitting there as a leader like I am, who's actively involved, and I spend a lot of hours, not only in my community working, but down at the Capitol fighting for the Northwest corner and fighting for our community down there. Nothing's more frustrating than when you got legislators sitting in front of you that you're taking the time out of your day to testify in front of them, and they're too busy eating their lunch or telling jokes between each other because they have no concern, because you may not be a part of their party, and I see it happening more and more, where these legislators really have to understand that the reason why we're in the positions we're in is because of all the people, not just your party. You know, it wasn't all Republicans that voted for Republicans. It was Democrats and independents. And you know what? I have no problem saying that I take the fight for everybody. If a Democrat came into my office, they get no different treatment than a Republican or an independent or anybody else. You've got a concern, you come in, let's fix it, let's find out how we get it done. And that's where our legislator has to be. Right now, there's such a divide between the legislators that you don't see that camaraderie of the fact that, hey, we're here for the people. Let's get it done. We only got 3 months. You know, we got a short session. You know, they're all talking about extended sessions and all these other special parameters and everything else. No, listen, you got 3 months to get the job done. My feeling is if you can't get it done in 3 months, you should be out and get out of the way, you know, and let the next person step up, because this nonsense, and I see it in both parties, they have forgotten that they're not there in spite of the people. They're there because of the people. And if they don't get the job done, get out of the way, you know, and let's just put this nonsense aside and let's get back to work and figure out how we save our economy, and let's make it happen. It's not rocket science here. You know, people used to tell me all the time, oh, it's a lot of work to run a town. It is a lot of work, but the reality is it's not rocket science. If you have common sense and you have a moral compass that says you're here for the people, you can get the job done, you know, but find a moral compass in a legislator, you know?
But, you know, Mike, and God rest his soul, Oz Grable, before he passed, he was working on election reform that I thought was very that could be very influential in terms of changing the dynamics that you just talked about. Open primary, for example, I think would be, you know, a step in the right direction in terms of, you know, getting rid of the lesser of two evils paradigm that we sometimes see ourselves in. But I think that it's very important that that especially now you take, you know, the experience that you've gained over the years as a representative to the House in a very, you know, strong, bold, and confident way. Because I think now, after some time, you get to see a consensus.
That's it.
You get to, you know, assess trends, how people are thinking, what things are developing, what possibilities are feasible on the horizon. And, you know, I think that's that has to be our default line right now.
That's right.
Because the ramifications are not. So I think, Mike, I want to, you know, just continue to wish you the best in all your endeavors. Your perspective is a unique perspective, but one that's needed in our political dialogue today, because we got to be honest. Those people that are behaving like that, they weren't selected to those positions. They were elected to those positions.
You're absolutely right, Jacque.
So
you know, you hit the nail on the head. We have great we've had the ability to have some really great legislators, Democrats and Republicans alike, in the Northwest corner that get the ideas of what we're fighting for here and what the needs are within our Northwest corner. But I think that much is lost when people end up in Hartford and they forget where they came from. And one thing my grandfather always taught me, and God rest his soul, he passed away before I got elected as my first run and first selectman. But he always told me, never forget where you came from and never forget you're there to help. Yeah. And I remember that every single day, and it keeps me grounded as a local leader to say that we got to work together here. And it's your perspective and my perspective, and having these conversations to get there and get the word out there.
Well, Mike, it's very ironic you say that, because, you know, I'm not a constitutionalist, but I know the spirit of the Constitution, and it requires compromise.
That's right.
That's why we have three co-equal branches of government. No one is going to ever be completely right. The only thing that's completely right is the Constitution and hopefully how it's interpreted. But that basic fundamental understanding is what every representative should take with them in their comings and goings in their political dealings.
That's right. And the government wouldn't exist without the people. Let's face it. When our forefathers put the government in place as a part-time gig, it was, hey, this wasn't a get-rich scheme. And I'll touch on this really quick because we could have a whole nother conversation about this. But one of the things that drives me crazy is that you want to equal the playing field between candidates. They need to create legislation to stop them from qualifying for public funds. Let's face it, the state does not have the extra money. These candidates, they qualify for public funds, and they're using public tax dollars to run their campaigns. And I don't know how many more coffee mugs I can fit up in my cabinet there. But the reality is, I don't want a coffee mug. I want you to take that. I want you to go out. I want you to fundraise. If the people believe in you, they'll give you the money. If they don't believe in you, you shouldn't get my money. You know, that's the way it should work. We have to get back to the foundation of what our country was built on, which is the people's country, the people as a whole. There's no differentiation. We're all in this together. We're all Americans. We're all here, and we all got to get the job done. And how we get it done is we're supposed to be able to elect people that get the job done on a higher level and set those parameters in place. And when they fail, they should be out, and people need to be brave enough to pull that lever in the other direction if they're not getting the satisfaction they need.
Mike, I can't even imagine ending this interview on any other note. You said it loud and clear, sir.
Thank you very much, Jacque. It's always a pleasure working with you.
Always, man. Thank you so much for taking time out to speak with us today.
Of course.
Anytime. Michael Criss, first selectman of the fine city of Harwinton, right here in the Northwest Hills of Northwest Connecticut. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you.
City